Well, it was hilarious today to see that LA District Attorney George Gascon posted on Twitter an update on the Brian Warner, Marilyn Manson situation. And not only did he do that, in what has to be one of the most awkward videos by a politician that I've ever seen.
The Brian Warner matter is still under investigation by the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department and has not yet been submitted to our office. Be assured that we are requesting regular updates on the status of this investigation. The District Attorney is committed to investing in trauma-informed care for all victims of sexual assault, abuse, and intimate partner violence. We understand how difficult it may be to come forward as a victim, especially when the case involves this level of notoriety, and are dedicated to treating all victims with the highest level of care and respect. Once we have received the case, it will be carefully evaluated by an experienced prosecutor to determine if it is appropriate to file charges at this time. We're hopeful that the LASD will present the case to us sometime this month.
You know, it's hard to believe that he's a lawyer or a politician because I don't see great communication skills. In fact, it seems like it was a lot for him to even get the words out. But anyway, so he posted something to Twitter updating us on the Marilyn Manson, Brian Warner situation. And what was hilarious about it was, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, is that he tagged Marilyn Manson Uncanceled, John, the guy at Marilyn Manson Uncanceled. He tagged the Marilyn Manson Uncanceled account and was replying to it. I wonder if he knew, or if anyone in his office knew, that he was replying to a pro-Marilyn Manson account, and he's basically showcasing a pro-Marilyn Manson account on his Twitter page. Maybe so. You never know, you know? I mean, look, the authorities know that this is a hoax. They've been investigating this thing, so they know better than anybody else that this is a hoax. And it's got to put them in a really awkward position to have Evan Rachel Wood constantly badgering them and getting her followers to badger them, you know, her almost 1 million followers on Instagram, you know, bugging them to call the DA's office, to call the LASD office and find out what the fuck is going on with the Brian Warner case. Why has nothing happened? We've been waiting forever. Well, maybe because there is nothing that's going to happen because he's innocent. You know, I talked months ago about the fact that I had had a conversation with an LASD detective who has been looking into this. He's on the team that's been looking into this. Not to give too many details, but I certainly got the underlying impression that they know this is bullshit. And I've talked to several people who have at this point now been interviewed by LASD detectives. And well, let's just say that I don't think that we can expect to ever see any kind of charges against Marilyn Manson, Brian Warner, and rightly so. You know, Evan Rachel Wood, even on Phoenix Rising, she was basically insulting the cops, you know, saying that she had to go ahead and move forward with exposing Marilyn Manson because, you know, basically the cops are just taking too long. Well, it's kind of hard to be prompt when the entire case is fabricated, right? That's a problem. So, you know, doubtless behind the scenes, I have no concrete knowledge of this, but I would imagine that what's going on behind the scenes is that the authorities in LA, the detectives and the district attorney are trying to figure out what to do about the fact that they've got this giant hoax on their hands and that the perpetrator of the hoax is so delusional that she actually thinks that if she keeps bugging them and getting her fans to bug them, that they're going to give her the result that she wants. That's quite a pickle to be in, especially when we're talking about a popular actress that has snowed most of the public with her bullshit story. So, yeah, I don't, I don't know. That was an amusing one. What else? What else? Yeah, so I am doing okay. Everything is fine, and so I appreciate everyone's concern. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look at the previous video that I did. But I am off Twitter, I'm off Instagram for a bit, but I'm going to continue to put out videos like this. And I just want to say too that there was some concern about me because I posted recently about depression and the difficulties of dealing with depression and all of that. And people thought that perhaps that, and I do suffer from depression, but people thought that perhaps I had basically a depressive episode and it had to get off social media. And that's not it. I explained in my last video what it was. And anyway, everything is fine. It did remind me, though, of a poem, a favorite poem of mine. And I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this. It's not one of the better known poems, but it's something that I studied when I was in graduate school. It's by a poet named Stevie Smith. She suffered from very serious depression her entire life. And she wrote this poem, and it's called Not Waving, but Drowning. And I think it's interesting. I want to read it to you. It's nothing to do, it's not a reflection of how I'm feeling at the moment or anything like that. No worries. But I thought it was interesting. And I do like from time to time to share literature that I think is relevant or is interesting. All right, so here's the poem. She says, or the narrator writes, "Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving, but drowning. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him, his heart gave way, they said. Oh, no, 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 it was too cold always, still the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving, but drowning." Now, there's some interesting aspects to this poem. First of all, the dichotomy between waving and drowning, and what this is trying to show here, and I'm sure that you've all, one moment. I'm sure that you all have seen the meme of, people who have sadly committed suicide, but it's pictures of them being gregarious and smiling, right? The idea being that the exterior, the smiles, the fronts that we put up are often not an accurate representation of what's going on inside. And that's not restricted to people who are suffering from depression or anything like that, right? That's something that we all experience in life. And so this juxtaposition here of the not waving but drowning, of having these two oppositional things, right? Because waving, you're happy, you're excited about life, you want to talk to people, right? So imagine that you've got this guy out in the ocean or whatever, right? And he's way out there and he's drowning. But people ashore, they see the hand moving, right? And they think, oh, he's waving. So I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition there in the poem. And then in the second verse of the poem, it said, "Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him, his heart gave way," they said. Now, larking, we don't use this term very much, but larking means having fun. And so what the people in this poem, what the people who are on shore watching this man, and after he's died, what they say is, oh, poor guy, he just loved having fun. He was just out there in the ocean. He was out there in the lake. He was just having a great time, and it just got a little too cold for him, and he died. So basically, he died from having a good time. Little do they know that, in fact, it was completely the opposite. See what he says? He says, oh, no, 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 no. It was too cold always, meaning even when you thought I was happy, even when you thought I was okay, I was just barely hanging on. And so again, it's a juxtaposition. It takes this idea that people have that this guy is just having a great time and that he died because he was just having a party out there in the middle of the lake or the middle of the ocean, right? And it flips that. And what the dead guy says is, no, it's the opposite. I was miserable. It was always too cold. Just people didn't notice. People didn't see it. People didn't realize. And so there's also a kind of a profound theme in this about miscommunication and about solitude and about the fact that even when we're not depressed, right? Even at times when life is going well, we are all kind of in our own little body of water and often misinterpreted or misunderstood by people, either because they misinterpret our gestures or our smiles or what we say, or because they actually are so disinterested that they don't really care. Oh, no, he's fine. See, he's waving. He's having a good time. Now, I bring that up not to be depressing or anything, actually, but because there's actually, I think, something sort of optimistic to be learned from the life of the person who wrote this poem. Now, the author, her name was Stevie Smith. Like I said, she's not as well known as some of the other 20th century poets, but she did suffer with depression her whole life. And one of the things that she said that helped her to keep going when she was going through tough times, and this applies even to people who, don't suffer from depression, but just suffer from life, just from the difficulties of life that bring us down at various times. She said that it was always helpful to her to know, and this sounds kind of morbid, right? This sounds kind of twisted, but follow the logic. She said that it was always helpful to her to know that suicide was there, that she could always exit at any time. And she said that something about knowing that the exit option was always there actually enabled her to keep going another day, right? Because what she would say to herself is, well, if I know that I can exit at any time, then is one more day, is it really too much to ask, right? I can do one more day. And she said that what she found is that one day after another, knowing that she had that option, she never needed to take it. And I'm not sure, if that would work for everybody, right? But I always thought that was something kind of interesting because she was so known for this poem about suicide and about depression. But she kind of had a way of sort of taking it and putting a kind of a twist on it in terms of her personal philosophy. So anyway, don't worry about me. I'm not bringing that poem up as a kind of a sign or anything. In fact, I'm having a good day today, and the stuff from the other day that's in the past, and I'm going to stay off social media for a bit. But everything's fine. And I wanted to bring up one more thing. I did a long lecture for my book club. Some of you may know this. I started a book club on Patreon for my some of my donors, my $29 a month donors. And so one of the perks that they get for that level of donation is they get to be in my book club. And every week I assign a different essay or short story. And then every Friday I put out a long video talking about it. And also I'm assigning one book a month for people who want to read an actual novel. But anyway, here's the point. I was talking the other day in this video for my patrons. I was talking about a Stephen King short story. And the short story is about a guy who develops obsessive-compulsive disorder. And I was talking about philosophical perspectives on obsessive-compulsive disorder, because obviously there are psychiatric perspectives, like in chemical imbalance and stuff like that. But anyway, there are different kinds of ways of looking at the mind and of looking at things that trouble people. So there's the chemical way, but then there's also the more psychoanalytic way, right? And even philosophical dimensions. Well, so anyway, in this story. And by the way, the short story is called N. It's the initial N. And you can find it actually if you go to my Patreon. I'll link below. Even if you don't join my Patreon, I have the short story for free for anybody. Okay, so I'll link that below. But in the short story, the story is about this guy who is taking. And I'm going to cut out all the fat, right? Just down to the basic plot. Basically, he is out exploring the countryside. And he comes upon a place in the woods or in the countryside where there are these stones. And at first, he thinks that there are like 5 stones. And then later, when he looks again, he sees 8. So the number keeps shifting. But anyway, the point is, there are these stones sort of arranged. And when he gets to this place, you can almost kind of imagine like a little Stonehenge or something maybe, right? But when he gets to this place, he notices that there is a kind of a thinning in what he calls the cloth of reality, that reality has worn thin, and that there is this evil, scary, chaotic dimension just beyond or just underneath. And he's afraid that this evil or chaotic dimension is going to seep through this thin place in reality, right? Where the reality as we know it seems to have worn thin. And it's a long story and everything, you should read it. But basically, he gets it into his head somehow that if he visits this place regularly and he counts the stones, like repetitively, right? Like he's got OCD. If he counts the stones, then that repetitive action of counting, and also if he takes pictures, there's all these different activities. If he does these different things in a certain order or a certain way, then what it does is it basically strengthens that weakened place in reality, that place where the fabric of reality is wearing thin and the chaos and the bad stuff is coming through. If he does these rituals, then it makes everything basically stay in place, right? And what happens in this story is that even when he is not there in this place, even when he goes home, even when he goes to work or whatever, he becomes convinced that if he does not maintain these obsessive compulsive actions, if he doesn't count regularly, if he doesn't take objects and place them correctly, basically his mind creates all of these different obsessive compulsive rituals that he has to fulfill constantly to the point of exhaustion. And if he doesn't, then he knows somehow that that thin place in the universe that he found in the forest one day, that it's going to get thinner and thinner and thinner, and finally evil and chaos and hell is going to break through, right? And so literally this character has the entire weight of the stability of the universe on his shoulders, and the only way that he can maintain the stability, the only way that he can hold back the chaos, is by these seemingly irrational, inconsequential, obsessive-compulsive activities of numbering and counting and all of that, right? Now, what is the significance of this? I love this story because I think that, knowingly or not, Stephen King is really getting an interesting dynamic of one theory about what drives obsessive-compulsive disorder. And the interesting thing about OCD is that even those of us who don't have it, most of us have at some point in our lives experienced some form of it. Unless you're just a truly relaxed, super relaxed, chill dude or dudette, you've had a little bit of the OCD. Everybody knows that. And it's something that everybody can kind of understand. And when I was, and I actually had a very heavy case of OCD, a clinical case of OCD when I was, and I'm sure it's linked to the depression and everything, but when I was a child. I haven't had it since then. But there was a couple of years when I was a child when I had, I think, clinical obsessive-compulsive disorder. And I had two compulsions. One of them was very common with OCD people, and it was hand washing. And so I would wash my hands until they would bleed, and then at night I would have to take ointment or Vaseline, or my mom would, because I was 9 or 10 years old, and would wrap my hands in cloth. Now, she probably should have taken me to a psychologist or something. The irony is that my mom actually, as we've talked about before, and she's talked about this before, is I can't believe I didn't take you to a therapist. But my mom herself is a therapist and has taught psychology at the university before. And my dad had an advanced degree in counseling and stuff. So, but anyway, physician heal thyself, right? Anyway, so I had that. And then another thing I had, and this went along, I think, with the very religious fundamentalist upbringing that I had growing up, was I had this prayer obsession. And I got it in my head, again, at the same time that I was doing the hand washing, I got it in my head that if I didn't pray a certain number of hours every night, or if I didn't pray for a certain number of things in a certain number, a certain order, then something bad would happen, right? It's always that fear, right? This is what I love about the Stephen King story. There's always that fear behind obsessive compulsive rituals that something bad, really bad, is going to happen, right? And so anyway, so yeah, I had, and it's not something that I like to admit. I mean, makes me sound nutty, but it's something that it passed, and it's not something that I've dealt with since then. Unlike, the depression, unfortunately. So here's the thing, though, and this is what I wanted to get at, because some of the people in my book club said that they found this actually really helpful. I had actually a couple of people in my book club who said that they suffer from mild obsessive-compulsive disorder, and that thinking about the OCD this way, it's not going to solve it for them or whatever, but it did give them a kind of an interesting perspective that's maybe a little freeing. It's better to understand why you do what you do than not. So the philosopher and psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, I've talked about him before. He's one of my favorite philosophers and one of my favorite thinkers. He was interested in what he called the division between the real and the symbolic. Now, understand these are two ideas that Lacan came up with, and the real does not refer to reality in a sense of like, in the way that we use the term, like real versus fantasy, right? So like when people say get real, or you need to see reality, it's the idea that there is fantasy, or there's falseness, or there's lies, and then there's the truth, right? That's not what Lacan is talking about with the real. In Lacan, the real refers to the fundamental, basic nature state of the world. It is pre-language, right? It is animalistic, and it is not ordered. It is the disorder of the world. And so we often experience the real in our lives through anything that basically intrudes through or breaks through the facade of routine and schedules and safety and security and all of that, right? Let me put it this way. So the natural world, it definitely follows its own laws, but from the perspective of human beings, it is a lot of chaos. It is chaotic, it is dangerous, you know, all of a sudden a volcano erupts, or all of a sudden there's a tornado, or all of a sudden someone drops dead of a heart attack they weren't expecting, right? There's all of this. The natural world is that of, at least from the human perspective, is that of chaos. And so Lacan said that, you know, we experience, one of the ways, the primary ways that we experience the real is through the intrusions of violence and the intrusions of trauma in our lives. And so Lacan says that we do have a kind of an ambivalent relationship with the real, because we also are very attracted to the real, because we hate the repression of our animal selves that is involved in living in a civilized, structured society, right? And I've talked about this before. It's very similar to the Freudian id, right? The fact that we have these animal natures and that we have had to basically turn our backs on them for the most part to be civilized human beings. And so there is also a kind of a desire or a wish to return to a more natural state where one can just totally be. Right? If you want to know more about this, look at my video on Tom Brady that I put out earlier, like last week. So Lacan says that we have this paradoxical relationship to the real. On the one hand, we want stability and we want order, and we hate chaos and we hate violence and we hate when things unpredictably intrude or they disorder our lives. But on the other hand, we also grow bored with the tedium and the predictability of a structured life, with the way that structured life seems to just suck all the joy or the fun or the spontaneity out of everything. And that's why then we do self-destructive things often, right? Because even in self-destruction, there is a kind of a radical exercising of freedom. I will do this even if it's irrational. So, what does that have to do with OCD? Well, I told you that for the most part, human beings desire to have structured and ordered lives. I told you that Lacan separates our life experience into the real and the symbolic. Now, the symbolic is that which gives structure to the real, or that which constrains or represses the real. And so you can think of the symbolic as all of those different structures or things in our life that add a sense of order. Language is a part of the symbolic, right? Language takes all of the wildness and complexity and animalism of human emotion, and it reduces it into nice little formulas. And in that way, unfortunately, it often fails us, as I've talked about before, right? Because it's impossible to take the complexity of what's going on here or whatever and put it into words. And that's why communication often fails. And in fact, Stevie Smith's poem that we just went over was somewhat about that, the failure of communication. But language structures give structure to things. Buildings give structure to things, right? Why do we build things? Because we want to keep out the wildness of nature. I don't want bugs in here. I don't want, rain. I don't want, if it's hot outside, I want it cool in here, right? Same thing with laws and legal codes and police, all of these things to try to clamp down on the unpredictability and the violence and all of that. So, what does any of this have to do with obsessive-compulsive disorder? Well, according to a Lacanian perspective, one who is in the grip of obsessive-compulsive disorder or of obsessive-compulsive urges, that person has become a kind of a slave to the symbolic. I told you earlier, the symbolic is all about order and structure, right? Well, think about what someone is trying to do when they are in the grip of an obsessive-compulsive act. Typically, that act itself does not have much meaning, right? There was no reason for me to keep washing my hands. You know, there wasn't, Ebola was not in the bathroom with me, right? If I missed a spot. It was not rational. There was no reason for me to keep praying for hours when I was a little girl. God was not going to strike me dead or whatever if I didn't pray. Or someone was not going to die if I didn't pray for them, right? And yet, there's this feeling, this irrational feeling that one has to do these things repetitively as a kind of a sealing off against what bad things might happen if I don't. I'm washing my hands because something bad may happen, some germ, something, and what? Or I'm praying because God may do something or something, right? If I don't. And so the reason, and this is what I'm trying to say, the reason why obsessive-compulsive disorders are so focused on structured activities, 1, 2, 3, or repeating or locking over and over or whatever, is because it's not about the activity that they're doing, it is about the sense of structure, of actually reinforcing the symbolic. If I check the lock again, I'm making sure that the symbolic is locked down and that real ain't coming through, right? Or if I wash my hands again, I'm going to really lock down and make sure there's not a spot of dirt or there's not a spot of germs or anything, because I don't want that real coming through. And so, you know, what I find on those rare occasions, I really don't suffer from any of the OCD stuff anymore, but what I find on those rare occasions when I do get those impulses coming back, is it's helpful to remind myself that what's actually going on is that my human mind is terrified of the real, of the chaos that is hiding behind everything in life, right? The fact that you could die in the next 5 minutes. I mean, that in itself is astounding. Have you ever stopped to think about how many things could go wrong? How many things have to go exactly right for your body to just not fall apart? All of the processes. And all it would take would be just a little, like, something going wrong, and then you're dead, like a little blood clot or whatever. Again, I'm not trying to be depressing, but what I'm trying to say is, whether I say these depressing things or not, they're already in your head. And we human beings, on an instinctive level, we understand that we are always just one tiny little nothing, little tiny millimeter away from utter chaos. 9/11, you know, I was telling 9/11, you know, the anniversary was yesterday. I wanted to do a video, but I didn't have time. You know, I wasn't feeling too great. But on 9/11, a friend of mine, he was riding on the subway that morning. This was before 9/11 happened, and he was going to work, and he actually worked by the Twin Towers. And he was a poet, this friend of mine, or that's what it was his hobby, poetry. And he was feeling really bored that morning. It was Tuesday morning, 9/11, 2001. He was feeling really bored that morning and really just kind of disgusted with how sort of just blah his life was, just schedule and routine. And so he wrote this poem. And do you want to know what the title of the poem was that he wrote that morning? Probably about 20 minutes before the first tower was hit. The title of the poem was Just Another Tuesday Morning. And it was all about this ordinary day and nothing was going to happen, right? Just another routine. Just another stuck in the wheel of the symbolic, right? And of course, we know what happened. And that is an excellent example of the real. It is that violence, that disorder, that chaos, that tragedy, that death that is just waiting to encroach. And it may not be today, it may not, or encroach, break through. And it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may be 20 years from now. But in some way, some form or other, it hits us all. It hits us either with someone else's death or our death or illness or catastrophe or something unforeseen, right? And so the obsessive-compulsive is one who understands that instinctively in a very powerful way. And they also understand that the symbolic is the structure that keeps all of that back. And so it's almost like in sort of an inherent way of understanding something that they don't actually fully understand. What they are doing with those rituals is trying to keep the real at bay. And so it's helpful to me sometimes to think about that, to realize that as the source of some of these feelings, because once one understands what one is doing, Once one understands that what one is really interested in is not how many times one is washing one's hand, but the fear that one has of the instability, the utter instability of life and the real that can break through at any time, then one can start to deal with the real fear and maybe what causes that fear and not the actual symptom. I don't know, just a thought. I'm not a psychiatrist. If you're having problems, go see somebody. But anyway, I just thought that was some interesting stuff. I'm going to have more out on my Patreon channel exclusive for patrons, and then I'm going to have more videos for all of you guys and gals on a range of subjects this week, from Manson to Depp to philosophy to whatever. So anyway, it's a new day. I'm going to be putting stuff out, and I appreciate you. As always, like and subscribe. You can hit me up on PayPal, Patreon, the link's below, and have a good day.